So we can all guess Bobby's move here, e4. Although he was still playing the Retti's opening from time to time. And I believe we do have one Retti opening tonight to look at from Bobby. c5, we have seen quite a few Sicilians in this match. And all pretty much, almost all the same line, just a few small variations. So knight f3, d6, d4, you can guess we're going to have an open variation. Now on knight c3, we're going to have Najdorf's variation and bishop c4. We talked about bishop c4 last week. Depending on the variation that black plays will determine which name we assign to bishop c4. On the classical or the Scheveningen, it is known as Sozin's attack, Benjamin or Benjamin Sozin. But against Najdorf's variation, it's known as Lipnitsky's attack, named for Isaac Lipnitsky. Both of these guys were Soviet masters and theoreticians. Many, many, many times when it starts out as a Lipnitsky, it transposes to a Sozin because e6 is such a common move, which is a Scheveningen. And we're going to see that in this game right now. So we transpose. We have castles, b5 hitting the bishop, bishop b3, bishop b7. And this bishop b7 is the flank variation. Bobby plays bishop to g5 here. The book move is rook e1 before you play bishop to g5. Bishop g5 comes after queen's knight d7. But Bobby playing bishop g5 right away, and that, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why that's frowned upon by the bot. I'm not good enough to know what would be wrong with playing it first. Cardoso goes ahead and plays the queen knight to d7. Bobby decides to capture the e-man. This is quite an interesting move. It's marked as inaccurate. Of course, rook e1 would have transposed to the book, but he's giving up a bishop for 2 pawns and some initiative. Well, of course, a piece for 2 pawns should give black at least a slight advantage, if not more. I am a little surprised to see the eval bar, yes, favoring black, but not favoring black all that much. So Cardoso puts his queen onto the c8 square, and knight takes the bishop, rook takes the knight, and here's another pawn now. So in the end, it was 3 pawns for a piece. Let's go back for a moment just so you can kind of fathom how that all unfolded. Sacrificing the bishop for 2 pawns, but because of the presence of this knight, the pawn here is under-defended, which is why the bot is indicating queen b8 should have been played, to add a defender to the d-man. For the tactic that can be deployed here is remove the defender. And that leaves white fairly well compensated for his piece. 3 pawns for a piece should be technically equal, right? So here Cardoso tried queen c6. Bobby defends the queen with rook a d1. Blunder? I'd say blunder is such a harsh annotation here. I mean, if you look at the eval bar, it's at pretty much dead center here. And 0.3 here. 0.2 now. It's settled on 0.2, 0.3. It can't decide. But my point is, how's that a blunder? How's that? At best, I'd say an inaccuracy if you base it on that math. But a blunder, that's awfully hard to appreciate. How could that be a blunder? Usually, to me, a blunder means you made a losing move. If I were to define mistake, inaccuracy, and blunder, blunder is a losing move. A mistake is a move where you're giving your opponent the upper hand, but he's not necessarily cleanly winning. And an inaccuracy is, okay, like this, where you give him a slight advantage, but he's really got to work hard to prove it. Queen takes the queen, rook takes the queen, and black castles. That's given the big red X. B4 is a thematic move here. Let's go back. You often see B4 in these lines, which would be answered by knight D5, no doubt. Inaccurate. Apparently, the better move is knight D1. In my mind, I see knight D5, and if bishop takes, then pawn takes. And, okay, my rook is somewhat out of place. But that's what I was thinking. Anyway, Cardoso, queenside castles, and Bobby doubles his rooks, which is also a very thematic, standard type of thing that you should do. And it's also given an inaccuracy. So I'm not getting along with Picklebot today so far. H6 hits the bishop. B4 is still an interesting move here. We can give that the interesting symbol. And again, I would play knight D5. Okay, I'd get a check mark here. And then more than likely, he'd get on the E file with his rook. Okay. I will say this back here. You want to resist taking the pawn. Yes, it's under super attack, but your knight is pinned. So you do not want to play the bishop takes and allow knight takes. Not unless you want to give up the exchange. Oh, wait a minute. You can take here. You can take there. Oh, better is bishop e7. Yeah, of course. Better is bishop e7. I don't know what I was doing. Yeah, of course. I actually had that in my notes and just reflexively captured the knight, which happens to me in games all too often. I have calculated the right move and reflexively play some other move. Let's go back. So h6 hits the bishop, bishop back to e3. Yeah, bishop h4 maintains the pin on the knight. Bobby choosing bishop e3, knight e5. Getting a big red X, black should play knight takes pawn here. Now that the pin is no longer in place, grab the pawn and simplify the position. Instead, Cardoso with knight e5. So rook takes rook check, rook takes the rook, and rook takes the rook check. King takes the rook. We bolster the central pawn with f3, king d7, king f2. And as you know, and we'll mention it here, in the endgame, kings are attacking pieces. And the first principle of the endgame is to activate your king, generally toward the center. Unless, of course, the position warrants otherwise. Here, bishop c6, pawn b3. And yes, black has one extra knight, but white has 3 extra pawns. And that is what we call compensation in chess. When you hear that term compensation, what it means is that there's some material imbalance, but you're compensated either in the form of another kind of material, such as the 3 pawns here, or some positional advantage. King e6 is played, h3, bishop b7, knight e2 here, knight c6, pawn h4 here, now bishop c8, knight d4 check, the knight trades off, and g5. So pawn takes pawn and pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes the knight, king takes the bishop, and Bobby's going to see if he can make good on these pawns. It's not likely. He goes c3, bishop e6, king e3, king e5, pawn g3, pawn a5, pawn f4 check. Pawns are traded. These 2 passers are white's hope for playing on. King d6, pawn f5 hits the bishop, bishop g8, now king d4, bishop h7, pawn c4, e5 was my choice here. This gets a star, but I thought I can play e5 and undefend the pawn because it's check. Comes with tempo. Of course, Bobby found the best move. But my thought was, he's got to move away from these pawns. and perhaps I can come over. The annotator not being kind to me today. Anyway, Bobby with c4 gets the star. So pawn takes the pawn right here, and I would have taken this with the king. He took with the pawn. He took with the pawn to make another passed pawn. My thoughts of taking with the king is to keep these pawns connected. Hey, the annotator finally agreed with me. So king c6, pawn a3, pawn a4, king e5, bishop g8, king f6, bishop takes the c-man, king e7, king c5, pawn e5, king d4, king d6, king e4, pawn f6, threatening pawn e6, which would interfere with the coverage of f7. And for that reason, king f5, that prevents e6. So king c5 says, okay, you've proven your point. The game is a draw. And Bobby played king c5, offered the draw, and it was accepted. So here's the point. If you save your bishop with bishop b3, I will play king b5. And when you grab the, b4, and what the point is, when you grab this pawn, you could play king b5 as well, for that matter. To be honest, it doesn't matter which of these two squares your king is on. The point is that your king is attacking the a-man, and you're going to force his bishop to take your pawn, and there's your draw. So it wouldn't have mattered if he played king b5 or king b4. It's the same thing. It's just different. But the final position is the same, isn't it? And of course, the promotion square being a light square, even if by some miracle you'd be able to work your pawn up there, his bishop will get on this diagonal and capture as soon as you promote. So a draw. Bobby Fischer with 93.8 accuracy. Cardoso with 94.1 accuracy. So Cardoso slightly more accurate this time. Accordingly, the single game ratings were 2,700 for Bobby Fischer and 2,750 for Cardoso. Not bad for a couple of 2,200, 2,300 players. A very competitive game. Bobby's opening was very good. Cardoso maybe even better in the opening. Bobby did abandon the book, so that's why I say that. But no mistakes, really. No major mistakes to speak of in the middle. Okay, the bot called Rook AD1 a blunder, but I think we all know better. And their endgames were impeccable as well. I think, too, the bot probably took issue with that sacrifice of the bishop for the two pawns.